There's a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture.
You like me. Right now. You like me.
Ever since I was a little kid, I wanted this.
Mom, I just want an Oscar.
I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of the Ultimate Oscar Showdown. And this week we are going to be continuing our look at the Best Supporting Actor category by breaking down and tier ranking the winners from the 1980s. If you're new to the series, that's what we do every single week. We've been looking at a bunch of different Oscar categories, tier ranking the Best Picture category, Best Actor, Best Lead Actress, now we're in Best Supporting Actor. A couple weeks from now, we're going to be looking at the Best Supporting Actress category. You guys have been showing a lot of support for the videos, commenting below, letting me know what your personal tier rankings are, so please do continue to do that. I love reading them, I love responding to them, and creating this great film community where we can also share our opinions. But without further ado, let's jump into the first winner, the 1980 Oscar winner for supporting actor, and that is Timothy Hutton, who was a relative unknown at the time, but he just started in a TV movie. This was his true film debut, and definitely I would still say the lead actor of the movie. Definitely a case of category fraud, but in the case of this video, because we only just look at the performances themselves, not who they beat or what category they should have been in, it just gives us a lot of opportunity to discuss the performance, because the actor has more opportunities to give us a great performance, and I think Timothy Hutton does give us a great performance here. As I talked about in my 1980s Best Picture tier ranking video, I think this movie is unfairly maligned because it beat out Raging Bull for Best Picture, so I think there's some negative thoughts as to it being the enemy, in the same way a movie like The King's Speech or Dances with Wolves sometimes gets a little bit of hate because, it beat out a more popular movie for Best Picture. One of the reasons why I stick up for the film is because of the performances, Hutton being among them, and he has this really peculiar sort of situation within the film because he is the depressed teen, and depression's a difficult emotion to capture on film and to act because you have to toe the line with being despondent and not really feeling anything, but still showing us enough emotion that we care for you, that we understand you as a character. You have to still show a little bit of emotion, but not too much to not seem depressed, but then of course you can't show no emotion at all, even if that's what, say, depression may feel like, because there's no way of communicating that to the audience. You just feel like you're not acting at all. And what Hutton does, I think, to emphasize this feeling of depression on the film is to emphasize hesitance. He's really great at that. You understand that he has something to say, he's just not exactly sure how to say it. He can't put the words together. He wants to express himself, but he sort of can't because of sort of the depression that he's feeling. Almost like when an actor tries to cry, but sometimes it's even better when they're trying to stop themselves from crying rather than just full out crying. There's that sense of will they, won't they? I think in a similar instance here with this emotion of the hesitance that Hutton really sort of plays into, helps us even, I think, care more for the character because we want to help him, but he doesn't even know himself how to help himself, and he's trying to sort of figure that out through therapy and through the relationships with his parents. And at times you see Hutton push up against some of his limited acting ability, but that's just because, he's such a young performer at this time, so it's definitely sort of excusable in that regard. But for me, it's a very solid performance that will go into the B tier. Then we have the 1981 winner, which is John Gielgud for Arthur, which is a very peculiar kind of a film looking back on it for me. Just the fact that this is a big hit comedy vehicle that also got nominated and then won an Oscar is something that you probably wouldn't see in modern day times. It would be like if Burt Kreischer's The Machine would have been a huge, massive success and then ends up winning an Oscar for Mark Hamill. Probably not going to happen, and it wasn't a hit. But back in the 80s, this was a common occurrence, or at least could be in this case. And John Gielgud is an established kind of English theater actor whose film roles, at least the ones that I've seen, he's been a butler, or he's been sort of the opposite of what his reputation is. It's always sort of the serious, established British actor, and they're either using that for weight in a movie like Murder on the Orient Express, or in this case, they're using it for humor. And I think the reason why he won the Oscar ultimately is because there's, a sense of respect that he has within the Academy, particularly during this time. The Academy usually likes to reward the elite British actor of their time, and he never won an Oscar before, so here was a good opportunity. Although it is strange that such a silly movie and a silly performance got the Oscar. And I'm all for the Oscars wanting to reward comedy performances. I feel like they rarely do that. Yet for this one, I felt it was a little bit one note, a little bit one-dimensional. He doesn't have a lot to do. I mean, he is just the butler and has to be sort of that very typical, prototypical English stiff upper lip kind of a straight man in the movie who does have some funny, dry, sarcastic wit. And his character, I think, unironically is serviceable within the story, but ultimately not too memorable and only has a few moments to shine. I think more so the Oscar and the feelings you have for the character has to do with how the character is written, more so than the performance that Gielgud is performing here. So for me, you're going to have to put this one in the C tier. And then the 1982 winner, Louis Gossett Jr. for An Officer and a Gentleman. And this was the first Louis Gossett Jr. performance I think I've ever seen. He's got a very strange post-Oscar career win, but I think I was able to understand the Academy at the time, because for a lot of people, I think that this was their first Louis Gossett Jr. performance. They'd seen him in TV shows and notable series like Roots. But for a lot of people, I do think that this was like his true sort of breakout. And because I hadn't seen any of his other films or TV, this was also sort of a breakout for me. And I liked the movie very much, and he was the standout, so I understood it from the Academy's perspective. Even though the movie doesn't necessarily have a great legacy necessarily of a modern day classic, despite it being such a huge hit at the time, it is sort of works as a sort of 80s period piece of what it was at that time, and I think you can, at least I did, you could enjoy it for what it is. And Gossett Jr. delivers an excellent performance in the film because he helps define that drill sergeant stereotype, which we see parodied and done many times for years since in movies like Full Metal Jacket just a few years later, or all the way up into Hacksaw Ridge, that sort of comedic, insulting drill sergeant. He really starts to help define that stereotype with this film, and he's great at that. He's very funny, he's very intense. You immediately understand who this guy is, why he's in the military, and he's definitely someone you don't want to mess with. So you immediately understand it on that element. But I also think that the performance is unsuspectingly deep, that we have scenes later on in the film when we get away from the sort of typical boot camp style of things, where Richard Gere sort of tests his manhood, or when they have some more sort of peer-to-peer, almost-esque type scenes. We see that he's more understanding. We see that he's not here just because he's a complete sadomasochist, but rather someone who wants the best out of his proteges, out of his students, what we'll call them, because he wants them to be the best soldiers they can and knows that this is the best way to do it. So there's a sense of caring and understanding that I think, and a softness side actually that he shows later on in the film that contrasts well with the very intense yelling scenes in the first half, which add another little bit of complexity to the film and to the range shown by Gossett Jr. So a really excellent performance, and I think a pretty iconic performance in that. So for me, we'll go into the A tier. Then the 1983 winner, Jack Nicholson, for Terms of Endearment. We've discussed this movie multiple times now, so we won't go too in depth with the film. It is a strange Oscar win, though, in that I don't think people would consider this a top 5 Nicholson performance, and yet he's really terrific at it. If we use a sports term, the movie really just allows him to cook and says, you know what, Nicholson, be lovable, be charming, be sort of sly the entire movie, and just do your thing. And he's great at that. It's a solid, very solid movie star performance. You don't believe he's somebody else. He's Jack Nicholson. It's what if your neighbor was Jack Nicholson. And the chemistry that he builds with Shirley MacLaine is, I think, really believable and understandable, and they have that sort of almost rom-com type energy where they hate each other and then they end up liking each other in the end. And I think his role is integral to the success of the film because it really helps support Shirley MacLaine's character and gives her a reason why we keep on going back to her character rather than her just, you know, nagging on her daughter. We actually get to give her her own sort of independence as well and her own storyline. So Nicholson's character is very important within the success of the film, and that's in part to how easy Nicholson is in this character of just being sort of the charming, seductive next-door neighbor, but then also not trying to be sort of too perfect and sexual or trying to reclaim his youth. There's a little bit of sense of patheticness that I think Nicholson's able to sort of capture into, because he's this astronaut that still thinks he's the hot stuff, even though he's aging and balding and putting on a little bit of weight. Nicholson sort of understands that and plays into that too, while still having that lovable charm that he can't remove whatsoever in the back. So absolutely, a really great movie star performance. Not the most transformative or memorable, but it's still, a movie I really like, and a performance I really like. So for me, it'll go into the B tier. Then the 1984 winner, Hang S. Nor for The Killing Fields, which is a movie I'd never seen before, and I knew Nor had won for the film, but I didn't really know who he was as a performer. I hadn't seen him in many other films, and I didn't know what to expect going into the film. And then reading more about his life and the fascinations with that, and then, how he was really sort of an inspiration in many ways for the story. I think it just adds so much more to the depth of the character on top of the performance. Of course, The Killing Fields being about the overtaking of Cambodia by the Khmer Rouge and their sort of dictatorship that occurred and genocide that occurred within Cambodia for those few years, about these journalists that have to sort of undergo it. And he's terrific in the part, in part because he has that experience, because he was a doctor, not a journalist, but a doctor living in under the rule of Khmer Rouge in these concentration camps, and then eventually comes to the States and becomes an actor, and then tells the story. Fascinating sort of blending of truth and reality, even though this is not based on him. He had a very similar experience and wasn't an actor before this, so fascinating to see him really take on that. So of course there's a sense of authenticity that he brings to the film. But I think the emotion of the film is really driven through his character, because it gives a face to the struggles of the country, rather than just this American tourist, or this American journalist rather, that feels like a tourist within the place. We actually get Nora's character, who is the sort of audience surrogate of the struggles of the country and the people of the country. So he adds that authenticity, which I think adds a lot to the film. But as an acting performance, it is well, realized and very smartly directed, I think, by Roland Joffe to help, more of a newer actor get these kinds of emotions, but given over ultimately from Nor's performance. He gives very little within the film. I think there's an easy sense of, okay, this is a tragic story. Let's cry a lot. Let's have big emotions. Let's be grand. But what Nor decides to do is try to be as stoic as possible, maybe because that's the sort of type of man that he was like in that generation, where he's trying to do the best for his family. He still has sort of a journalistic duty. There's a strong sense of morals within this character. He wants to do the best for his family. He wants to be sort of the stoic leader of his family, but then also be a strong journalist and be, by Sam Waterston's character, his side, and to tell this story. But you still understand that this is a great sacrifice for himself, for his family, that he's devastated with what's happening with his country, that he has this sort of internal struggles, particularly the scene when he's being asked to stay, even though he wants sort of to leave. He knows what his sort of moralistic journalistic duty is, but it's still a very tough pill to swallow. And we can see those sort of machinations and see those thoughts going on within just sort of a stoic, subtle acting. We can see that kind of struggle going on with Nor. It's a really excellent performance and a great execution of that subtlety of those sort of dueling emotions. I think he's really excellent at. So a truly authentic performance based on his past experiences and what he brought to the film, but also as an actor, he is very impressive. So a great performance for me that will go into the A tier. Then the 1985 winner, Don Amici for Cocoon. And this is a strange win. And I usually say this, a strange win or unique win, when talking about these sort of forgotten type roles, because usually, like in this case, we have these legacy awards, the It's Time awards, where we have these actors who do these great parts for their entire career, and then do a part near the end of their career, and it's good enough that they give them an Oscar, even though they probably should have given it to them for an earlier role. We see this all over the time, but usually there's some sort of understanding. We'll see Geraldine Page and she'll be the star of the movie and have these big emotional scenes. Or one of the characters, one of these actors like Jack Palance, let's say in City Slickers, which we talked about last week, he dies in City Slickers. So there's a sense of, oh, okay, a strong character with an emotional connection where he dies in the movie and we feel like they're going to die in real life, so we want to give them a reward while they're still alive. Meta elements to it. There's always some sort of understanding as to, maybe I don't agree with the Legacy Award win, but is an understanding why people gave it to them. But there's no reason, in my opinion, why this movie got rewarded for this performance. It's very strange. The one thing I think about when I think about this performance is why. It's, Wilford Brimley has some emotional scenes. Jack Gilford has a very emotional scene. Brian Dennehy is great in the movie and has lots of emotional scenes. But Don Amici doesn't really have a key scene. He's not a super key, important part of the film. He's just sort of one of the three guys. He doesn't really blow you away. Even if I didn't like the performance, sometimes you can sort of understand the machinations of, okay, this is supposed to be the big emotional crying scene or whatever, so that's why people connected to it. I just don't really understand why, and wasn't really moved by the performance at all. It's like saying, what's the taste of water? He's just sort of non-existent. And, that's arguably worse than being bad. It's just a totally forgettable performance. I've seen it over a week ago now, and I'm still trying to figure out certain key scenes that he has, and I just never emotionally connected to his character in the first time I saw the film, and even thinking about it since, it just becomes more and more vague as we go along. So for me, it's not necessarily being bad, it's just non-existent. So it's going to go into the D tier. Then the 1986 winner, Michael Caine, for Hannah and Her Sisters, which is the movie I quite like, and decided to rewatch for anticipation for this episode, and then Diane Weiss won for Best Supporting Actress, so we'll talk about her a month from now. And I was a little bit disappointed in ultimately the performance. I think the three women, Hannah and Her Sisters, are written so well and have so much depth and understanding that Michael Caine's character feels very sort of pathetic and buffoonish. He's very one note. He's just sort of simping head over heels for Lee, Barbara Hershey's character. And the more the movie goes along, and actually the more we understand the motivations and the interior lives of the women, the less this character feels very well realized. Kane's pretty good at some of the comedic elements and working with Alan's dialogue and has the neuroses very well. But all the understanding of his character in terms of his emotions and his thoughts come through narration and these small bits. But nothing necessarily about the performance itself that gives me that sense of emotion. All I know is that he's really head over heels and sort of pathetic for this woman. But when they get into the relationship parts of the film, it's hard for me to understand why either of the women really like this guy, aside from the fact that they like him and because he's nice. It's just a very sort of simplistic, slightly neurotic, nice guy kind of a character that I think Kane doesn't totally bring a lot to. So I'm always looking for some sort of nuance or emotional depth or understanding within this character, and I never get it. And Kane's not necessarily bad in the movie. He's serviceable, but just the character itself is, I think, a little bit one-dimensional, one note. But Kane does well with the dialogue and is funny at times, so that's enough for me to put it at the C tier, but a little bit disappointing on the rewatch. Then the 1987 winner, Sean Connery, for The Untouchables. Not unlike Nicholson's win, this is very much a movie star performance, like Nicholson in terms of endearment. Connery is not trying to be transformative. This is a period piece set in Chicago, but he has to play a fictional cop because they couldn't really find a guy that was like this, that could be, yes, he's Irish in the movie, but he's just got a Scottish accent. He's just Sean Connery, so, a little bit of points I got to deduct because of that. But, at the end of the day, you don't want Connery necessarily to be transformative. You want him to be Sean Connery because he's very charming, because he's very sort of stoic and heroic in the film. And there's something to him in this performance where he just fits. I think he's really apt at understanding the tone of the films he's in and his role within them. Just when he gives a speech and his rhythm of the story, like telling that he gives, his dialogue, and just the way he holds a gun or stands or wears the suit. He just feels like he fits in, and immediately gives the movie a sense of believability and of trust, and of course has that sort of meta aspect of the older actor in Connery talking to the very young actor in Costner and giving him some advice, while also being that relationship within the story, being the two cops. Costner's Elliot Ness, who's trying to hunt down Al Capone, and he has that sort of stoic wisdom that I think helps with the seriousness and the weight of the film, but then it also can still be charming and funny and Sean Connery movie star-esque. And this is a very critical role for him, I think, really helping him shed the James Bond-esque, this Hunt for Red October, it really helps us understand him outside of Bond to become a great movie star and actor rather than just James Bond. And this, of course, combined with the Oscar too, helps very much. So it's not a transformative performance, but Connery knows what he can do, does that exactly, and does it well. So the performance will go in the B tier. Then the 1988 winner, Kevin Klein, for A Fish Called Wanda. And like we discussed earlier, it's very rare for the Oscars to reward a comedic performance, but I wish they were to do it more often. And this is maybe one of the silliest performances. Arthur was maybe one of the silliest movies to ever win an Oscar. This is definitely one of the silliest performances to ever win an Oscar. And Kevin Klein, post-Oscar win, sometimes I wish he was in more stuff, in more movies and TV shows. He does seem like he's sort of content with only doing a project every so now and again, because he's got the Oscar, he's got the money, I'm sure. And comedic performances are hard to judge because either you find them funny or you don't. In comedy, in that way, it's difficult to judge. And while Kevin Klein actually doesn't have me rolling on the floor all the time, I don't love this movie, I do sort of recognize and appreciate and enjoy the true commitment to the character. The fact that Klein is so well apt at telling us who this guy is, at immediately giving us an understanding of this guy's very narcissistic, he's a little bit dim-witted, he's very prideful within the film. So we immediately understand his character. And because we immediately understand his character, it gives the filmmakers more of an opportunity to subvert those expectations and sort of play with them, and to help us understand that, we know what he's going to do in the situation, and it adds to some of the comedic effects of the film. So a testament to Klein's ability to understand who his character is and immediately tap into and help us understand who this guy is. And then even just the physical performance of the film. Sometimes you'll watch it just in a wide frame and you'll see him in the back corner of something doing some weird move or slithering around a room, and it's hilarious because of how sort of mime-esque and exaggerated his movements are. Very dynamic, very funny, and just very silly. It's a very silly performance. I think he's not trying to take himself too seriously, and as a result we have a nice fun air to the film, and his sort of quick dialogue, his funny facial reactions, and great physical movements create a really sort of, I think, a semi-iconic, very funny comedic performance. Definitely a cult kind of a movie. So if you haven't seen it, I recommend it, because you could be a member of the cult of the film. But it is one of those performances that I'm glad has an Oscar. So for me, it will go into the B tier. And then the 1989 winner, Denzel Washington, for Glory, which was, I think, his true sort of breakout type performance. Of course, he was nominated for Cry Freedom before. He was in a soldier story, so he had a couple integral roles before that. But I think with the supporting actor Oscar win here, and really that sort of single tear crying scene, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but that was just an iconic scene where you go, oh, this guy's going to be in my life for a long time. This is a star. It just immediately sort of establishes him with that. And even though you wouldn't think of this, I think, as a top 5 Denzel movie, it really is, I think, a coda in many ways to understanding his success as a movie star. Because even though he's a supporting actor in this movie, there's so much a sense of heroism and courage and strong moral beliefs that we see in a lot of great movie stars or a lot of great action stars. They have a sort of seemingly strong moral code and a sort of decency that they have to them. And I think Denzel executes that here. Of course, in the sort of back and forth that he has with Morgan Freeman's character and some of the other newly released slaves in the army, he has sort of like a funny, teasing, back and forth element that shows some of his humor. But then when we get to that sort of pivotal scene where we see him cry and that single tear roll down his face, we understand the strong sense of heroism and courage that he portrays not only is he a striking presence, but he also gives this aura of being a strong man who won't back down and will stand for himself. And just that sort of image itself, the way you see it on screen, you immediately understand that this could be an action star, a movie star, could play Malcolm X, because of how attractive the camera is to him in his sophistication is really what I'd say it. So a great performance that I expect it to be great because, you know, Denzel's got one of the best IMDb's of all time. He's got a really great career and is a wonderful actor. So it's understandable why everyone sort of was so impressed with this film, because it is an impressive performance. I almost wish he was just a little bit in more of it, because he's really the third, fourth lead of the film, so sometimes you wish that there's more to it, but still a very terrific performance. So it will go into the A tier. But that's about it, guys. Take a look at the list. No S's this decade, so maybe a little bit disappointing in that regard. Next week will be an interesting one. 70s, a very excellent decade for films. Supporting actor maybe a little bit less so, maybe some highs, some lows. We'll worry about that next week. But let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts are. But that's about it. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Like I said, like the video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more videos. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.